Mr. Melvin Yong.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the bill. With the increase in these amenities arising from the explosive growth of personal mobility devices and the introduction of bicycle sharing into our land transport landscape, it is timely that we make the necessary amendments to our laws to tighten enforcement and safeguard public interests. We need to ensure a safe and harmonious sharing of public amenities, such as roads and pathways, for our people. However, I'd like to seek some clarifications, and I have some suggestions for the Ministry to consider. First, Mr. Speaker, I broadly agree with the intent of outsourcing enforcement actions. The new laws can only be effective if they are supported by sustained enforcement actions. The outsourced enforcement officers can be an important supplementary force when it comes to enforcement, as it would not be prudent for the LTA to employ hundreds more enforcement officers. It is therefore important that these officers be adequately trained as an authorized representative of LTA, as they represent government authority when carrying out their duties. Under Section 11(1)(d) of the proposed amendments to the LTA Act, outsourced enforcement officers must have suitable qualifications or experiences. I would like to clarify what would constitute suitable qualification or experience that the LTA has deemed suitable for this job. Mr. Speaker, the LTA also rolled out the Volunteer Public Path Wardens program last year to build up a core group of volunteers with enforcement powers and cultivate good riding habits through the community. Was this program successful? What lessons have LTA learned from the program? I'm of the view that the volunteer wardens and the outsourced enforcement officers can and should complement each other in keeping our shared pathways safe for all users. That said, will the LTA also consider using technology to reduce the reliance on manpower for enforcement? For example, having a common fleet management system to track and monitor the use of all active mobility devices could better aid in the deployment of the very limited ground resources. On the topic of PMDs, I note that the Ministry has recently accepted the Active Mobility Advisory Panel's recommendations to require cyclists and PMD users to stop at road crossings and look out for vehicles before resuming their journeys. I welcome this move, as between 2016 and 2018, 80% of accidents involving PMDs were due to PMD collisions with vehicles. Videos of PMDs speeding across crossings, even when the traffic lights were not in their favor, have been widely circulated on social media. However, if the proposed measure to stop and look out for vehicles at road crossings fail to yield a reduction in the number of accidents at such road crossings, would the Ministry consider introducing rules to mandate dismounting the PMD at road and zebra crossings? Mr. Speaker, the active enforcement of safety rules must be done together with adequate and proper training of PMD users, including young users, to prevent avoidable accidents. Much like how we would be required to pass a test before being allowed to drive a motor vehicle, would the LTA consider making training mandatory for PMD users? For a start, to minimize costs and administrative work, training could be conducted online with users taking a quiz to ensure that they have sufficient safety knowledge prior to registration and riding of a PMD. Alternatively, introducing signs such as stop and look out for oncoming traffic at suitable road crossings could potentially help in reminding PMD users to take ownership to ride safely and work towards the safe sharing of pathways for the people around them. Mr. Speaker, there is an average of 3 accidents a month involving pedestrians and PMD users. Some of the pedestrians involved in these accidents had suffered very serious injuries. This begs the question on whether third-party liability insurance should be made mandatory for PMD users. The virtue of mandatory insurance would ensure that victims would get a justified amount of compensation, and the offending PMD users would not escape the consequences of their action. Adopting a similar liability and compensation framework as per motor vehicles could go a long way in ensuring that the victims would not be overly burdened by medical expenses in the event of a serious accident. In the overall active mobility ecosystem, PMD retailers play a crucial role as a gatekeeper of compliant models into the market. Section 32 of the Active Mobility Act acknowledges this, and the bill makes further refinements on what the retailer can advertise. However, the regulations seem to place the emphasis solely on physical brick-and-mortar retail shops, which presumably are easier to enforce against. But what about online retailers selling non-compliant devices? Some weeks back, the Straits Times featured a story about an online seller operating out of a HDB flat in Yishun, and he had more than 40 e-scooters stocked up in the four-room HDB flat. In the article, a buyer commented that his e-scooter battery bought from this online retailer became faulty after just 10 days, while a neighbor was worried about the possibility of a fire breaking out in this home warehouse. I too share the same worries. We have already seen an increasing number of cases where PMDs, presumably non-compliant ones, had caught fire when their batteries were charging. I urge the Ministry to put in place measures to block the online sale of such non-compliant PMDs. Mr. Speaker, the strict rules governing PMDs have seen some unscrupulous retailers turning to selling motorized wheelchairs as PMDs to circumvent these restrictions. Motorized wheelchairs are meant for use by the disabled and the elderly. These motorized wheelchairs can be costly to purchase, particularly for those with severe condition and have financial constraints. Expanding the Active Mobility Act to govern these motorized wheelchairs could therefore have a negative impact on the most disadvantaged within our society. I'd like to ask the Minister, how many of the current models of motorized wheelchairs would be considered as non-compliant? And if the LTA would have an appeal board to evaluate and grant exceptions on a case-to-case basis for deserving cases. Mr. Speaker, incidents that damage road infrastructure and cause massive disruptions to our road transport network often come with high costs. Besides the large repair bill, there is significant impact to work productivity and economic opportunities. I therefore support the bill's proposal to increase the maximum fine for intentionally causing significant damage from $10,000 today to $100,000. However, this sum can be minor, especially if charged against big companies. I'd like to ask if the Ministry would consider an option to impose a multiple factor in the penalty for large corporations so that we can better deter such incidents from happening. In conclusion, as a former police officer, I deeply understand the challenges faced in enforcement work. It is not easy. Where possible, we should embrace smart enforcement and reduce our reliance on manpower. Educating our growing number of PMD users through some form of mandatory training would also go a long way in ensuring that safety remains a key priority, even as the PMD users are scooting about Singapore. With that, I support the bill.